The studio lights at Jimmy Kimmel Live burned hotter than usual that night, cutting through the haze of nervous energy in the Hollywood air as President Donald Trump marched onto the stage with his son Barron right beside him, both grinning like they had already won, ready to destroy every disgusting rumor about the family once and for all. But Jimmy Kimmel just smiled that sweet, dangerous smile and brought out two lab technicians in white coats that would flip the entire night upside down in ways nobody could have predicted. And what started as Trump's proud victory parade turned into total chaos when the Dina results hit the screen like a bomb, proving Barron was 99.999% his and Melania's biological son, while also revealing there was zero sign of any and a Dina test all unfolding in real time. And it all began weeks earlier when rumors had started spreading like wildfire through social media and news cycles, with Jasmine Crockett hinting in interviews that Barron wasn't really Melania's son, and even Barack Obama making sly comments in private fundraisers that somehow leaked to the public, suggesting the boy was actually Ivanka and Donald's child. And while it sounded insane to most people, it spread everywhere, with comment sections exploding and news anchors carefully choosing their words around it. And Trump had been absolutely furious, calling it the sickest fake news yet. And that was saying something from a man who had been called fake news by half the country himself. And tonight he was clearly, and honestly, in that moment, the energy he brought made you understand exactly why people either loved or hated him, because there was no in between with Donald Trump in a room, never had been. And right beside him, matching his pace but somehow quieter, was Barron, tall for his age with serious eyes scanning the room without performing anything for the cameras. And while his father worked the crowd, instinctively touching the energy, feeding off it, redirecting it, Barron simply walked, observing, processing, taking it all in with a composure that seemed impossible for a teenager. And when they took their seats, the boy sat straight with hands on his knees, looking way older than his years under the bright lights. And there was something about the way Barron held, and Jimmy nodded at them both, but his eyes kept flicking to Barron like he knew something big was coming. And it came sooner than anyone expected, when Barron did something nobody saw coming by turning his head slowly and looking straight into the main camera, feeding live to millions at home. And his voice came out clear, steady, and way stronger than anyone expected from a kid his age, saying, "I'm here tonight because some powerful people have been lying about who my mother and father are. My mother is Melania Trump. My father is President Donald J. Trump, period." And the studio froze for half a second before erupting in cheers and gasps and applause, the kind of crowd reaction that production teams spend entire careers trying to manufacture and almost never genuinely get. And Trump broke into a huge grin, nodding proudly and pointing at his son like he just scored the winning touchdown in the biggest game of the season. And he looked over at Jimmy with pure satisfaction written all over his face. And the applause finally settled, but the studio still crackled with electricity as Trump shifted in his seat, leaning forward like he was about to address a massive rally. His face, serious eyes locked on the camera, and he started speaking in that booming voice with familiar energy, saying, "Let me be very clear tonight. The fake news has gone too far this time. Jasmine Crockett and even Barack Obama have been pushing these disgusting, sick lies about my youngest son. Barron is my son with Melania Trump. Melania Trump, the most beautiful, elegant first lady we've ever had. These people are jealous. They're losers, and they can't stand a strong family like ours. I'm here to end this." And Trump wasn't done as he turned his attention straight to Jimmy with a sharp smirk forming on his lips, because he loved moments like this, owning the stage, putting the host on defense, controlling the temperature of the room, saying, "Jimmy, you've been cracking jokes about me for years. Honestly, without me, your show would be as dead as your ratings on a Tuesday night." And laughter rippled through the crowd, some nervous, some genuine. And Trump sat back clearly pleased with himself, arms spread like he just delivered a knockout punch. But Jimmy didn't flinch. He let out a soft chuckle, nodding slowly with that trademark calm smile. But his eyes stayed sharp, the kind of sharp that doesn't come from anger but from preparation. And he said, "Mr. President, I'm..." And the studio went quiet again, with that last part hanging in the air heavy and pointed like a question mark made of smoke. And whispers broke out instantly as Trump's eyebrows shot up for a split second before he recovered. But the tension had already jumped to a new level. And before he could fire back, Barron suddenly straightened up beside his father, the boy looking straight ahead with voice steady and surprisingly strong, saying, "These rumors hurt my mom every single day. They're not funny. They're not true. They're just lies from people who want to tear us down." And the audience erupted with applause, thundering through the studio louder and more intense than before, with several people standing up cheering for a kid who had just spoken with the choir. And Trump broke into a huge, proud grin, reaching over and squeezing Barron's shoulder, saying, "That's my boy. Smart, loyal, tells it exactly like it is." And he looked at the crowd saying, "You see, folks, even my son knows the truth better than these so-called leaders spreading poison." And he rode the wave, launching into a warmer story about having a wonderful family and raising all their kids with strong values, and how Barron is tall, sharp, loves sports, very athletic, just like his dad, and they have dinner together when they can and talk and laugh with real family time. And nobody knows them better than them. And these rumors are made up by people who have nothing better to do. And he painted the picture with big gestures, voice rising and falling like he was at a campaign event. And the audience listened closely, some nodding along, caught up in the moment, as it felt almost touching for a second, with the powerful father and his composed son sitting side by side under the bright lights, presenting a united front against a world that had tried to tear them apart. But then Jimmy leaned in a little closer, still smiling, that easy smile, and said, "Sounds really nice." Those old photos, though, the ones where Barron looked so different from the rest of the family when he was little, you know, the ones people keep posting and sharing on. And Trump's warm expression vanished instantly, with his jaw tightening and eyes narrowing. His anger flashed across his face so fast it was almost alarming, the sudden temperature drop of a man who does not not like being questioned on his own terms. And he snapped, "That's ridiculous, Jimmy. Those pictures are doctored, fake, total garbage from the fake news media. You know it. I know it. Everybody watching knows it. Stop with these games. You're trying to stir up trouble on your own show." And his words echoed through the studio as the audience reacted with a loud collective murmur, with some gasping and others shifting in their seats. And the comfortable warmth of the family stories was gone, replaced by the jagged energy of a man who felt ambushed on the very. And Trump leaned back in his chair, chest puffed out, clearly feeling like he needed to reestablish dominance by pointing at Barron, saying, "Look at my son right here. This is living proof. No fake news, no lies, just the truth standing next to me." And he kept going, listing achievements, talking about the economy, the board of the numbers, the well-worn greatest hits of every Trump rally performance. And the audience clapped along and places caught up in the momentum. And Trump glanced at Jimmy with a satisfied look like he had already won the night. But then Jimmy raised his hand slightly and nodded toward the big screen behind them, saying, "Since we're talking truth tonight, Mr. President, let's take a quick look at what started all this." And then Obama's leaked comment followed, saying, "Some family secrets run deeper than we think, especially with the Trumps." And the audience gasped loudly, with a few boos breaking out as Trump's face turned red instantly, and he shot forward in his seat, cutting Jimmy off, saying, "That's enough. Turn that off right now, Jimmy. Those are total lies taken out of context, fake news garbage. I won't sit here and let you play that crap on my time." And his voice rose sharp and angry as he waved at the screen. And the warm confidence from moments earlier had cracked visibly as he looked ready to keep shouting. But Barron placed a hand calmly on his father's arm, saying, "Dad," quietly but firmly enough for the microphones to catch every syllable, "let me speak." And Barron stood up slowly, taller than most had expected under the bright lights, with something about the way he rose from that chair, unhurried, deliberate, with a certainty that didn't belong to his age, making the entire room shift. And he turned straight to the main camera, eyes steady and serious, with every person in that room leaning forward at the same moment. And he said, "If you truly believe I'm not my mother's son, then prove it. Show the world your evidence. But if you can't stop hiding behind rumors and lies, leave my family alone." And the studio exploded with the audience jumping to their feet, cheering and clapping louder than they had all night, with phones flashing everywhere as the moment went instantly viral, with people shouting Barron's name 30 seconds straight. And Trump stood up too, wrapping an arm proudly around his son's shoulder, smiling wide like the victory was sealed as he nodded at the crowd, soaking it all in. But across the desk, Jimmy Kimmel stayed seated, still smiling, that same calm, knowing smile. And in that stillness, in that deliberate, patient choice not to stand up and react, was the clearest signal yet that the night was nowhere close to over. And the applause for Barron's bold stand was still echoing through the studio when Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward with his calm smile never fading, as the room felt charged, like everyone could sense, even if they couldn't name it, that the temperature was about to change completely. And Jimmy waited just long, and the side door opened with two technicians in crisp white lab coats walking out carrying small medical kits. As the audience gasped loudly with a room-wide inhale that was almost perfectly synchronized, and cameras panned to the technicians as they set up a small table with swabs, vials, testing equipment arranged with quiet professional efficiency, as the studio lights made the whole scene feel surreal, like a hospital had materialized inside a comedy set. And Trump's face changed instantly, with his proud smile disappearing, replaced by shock, then anger, and the transition happening in under 2 seconds as he shot up halfway out of his chair, pointing at the technician, saying, "This is ridiculous, Jimmy. You don't do medical tests on live television." And his words echoed through the studio, with the audience murmuring in surprise as some leaned forward and others whispered excitedly to the people beside them. And Trump kept going, clearly rattled in a way that went beyond his usual practiced outrage, saying, "I won't allow this circus on live TV." And Jimmy stayed completely calm, leaning back slightly with that steady, knowing look that was starting to feel more dangerous with every passing minute, as he said, "Mr. President, your son just challenged the world to prove it. What better way than science? This is about truth, not embarrassment." And the tension in the room was electric, with every eye locked on the Trumps. And Trump turned quickly to Barron, whispering something fast, trying to pull him back as Barron. And his voice carried through every microphone in the room as the studio exploded, with the audience erupting in a massive roar of cheers, gasps, wild applause, filling the air from floor to ceiling, with people jumping to their feet, phones held high, recording every second as the noise was deafening. And Trump reached out, trying to stop him, saying, "Barron, wait, you don't have to do this." His voice urgent and reaching for his son's arm. But Barron gently moved past his father's hand as he sat back down firmly and calmly rolled up his sleeve and held out his arm toward the technicians without hesitation, without a flicker of doubt on his face. And the two lab techs moved forward, carefully, professional and quiet. And Trump sat back down. And Jimmy watched it all with that same calm smile, but his eyes were very sharp. And the studio lights felt harsher now, with every camera zooming in tight as the two lab technicians approached Barron. And one laid out a sterile blue pad on the small table, while the other opened the medical kit with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times and understood that this particular 1,001st time would be completely different. And the audience had gone completely quiet, the kind of silence that only falls when a room full of people collectively understands they are witnessing something that cannot be undone. And Barron sat perfectly still, sleeve rolled up, arm resting on the table, with his face utterly and Trump leaned in close with his face tight with stress, saying, "You really don't have to do this, Barron," urgently and loud enough for the nearby microphones to pick up and broadcast to millions. "We don't need this circus. Let's stop right now." But Barron slowly shook his head and looked his father straight in the eyes, speaking loud enough for the entire studio and everyone watching at home to hear, saying, "Dad, if we run now, they'll say we're scared. I'm not scared." And the words hit like a thunderclap, with gasps rippling through the crowd as Trump froze, mouth slightly open, clearly caught off guard by his own son shutting him down on live television. And the tension in the room spiked so high you could feel it pressing against your chest. And Jimmy Kimmel, "Barron, you're handling this better than most adults I know." And a wave of nervous laughter swept the audience, but quickly faded back into stunned silence as the technician slid the needle in, and Barron didn't flinch, not even slightly, as a small vial began filling with dark red blood. And the second technician labeled it carefully, writing the time and date with steady hands. And Trump stared at the needle jaw, clenched fingers, tapping rapidly on his knee with every second, feeling like it was being stretched out longer than the last. And the technician finished removing the needle, pressing a cotton pad to Barron's arm before sealing the vial in a tamper-proof bag right in front of the cameras and holding it up so everyone could see the process was clean. And we have a live camera feed set up there so you can watch the entire testing process in real time. And on the big screen behind them, a split feed appeared showing lab technicians already waiting at a facility somewhere across the city. And the sealed sample was placed into a secure transport case and handed to a courier who walked out of the studio without a word. And Trump sat back, breathing heavily, looking like a man who had arrived at a celebration and discovered it was something else entirely. And Barron rolled his sleeve back down calmly with his face showing no regret. And the studio settled into a heavy, uncomfortable wait with the big screen showing the live feed from the independent lab with technicians in white to seize control of the room the way he always did, with volume and energy, and the sheer force of presence by launching into stories about winning in 2016 and his second term building the greatest economy building. Strong borders, making great trade deals, and his family being through everything together. And he kept talking, jumping from one story to another, waving his hands, pointing at the audience. And some people clapped politely, but the energy felt forced in a way it hadn't earlier. And the longer he spoke, the more obvious it became that he was filling dead air, trying to push the focus away from the ticking clock and the live lab feed on the screen behind him, with sweat glistening on his forehead under the hot lights. And Barron sat completely still the whole time, didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak, with his eyes staying locked forward with a calm, rock-solid determination that made him look far older than his age. And that quiet strength somehow made the tension even thicker, because in a room full of noise, the stillest person is always the most powerful one. And then came the moment nobody expected, when one of the female lab technicians back at the testing station adjusted her microphone, not realizing it was still live, and her voice cut through the studio speakers, loud and unmistakably clear, saying, "Preliminary results already show clear signs. We're seeing definitive markers here. This is straightforward." And the entire studio went dead silent for a split second, then exploded with loud gasps and whispers erupting simultaneously as phones lit up everywhere, with the crowd erupting into competing reactions, with some cheering, some covering their mouths. Sitting next to them, and Trump's face drained of color, with his confident smile vanishing so completely it was like watching a power outage as his eyes widened with real panic, not performed anger, but real fear, as he stared at the screen, then whipped his head toward Jimmy for the first time all night, with genuine fear crossing his face, the look of a man watching his carefully constructed wall begin to crack. And Jimmy waited just long enough for the shock to sink in, then leaned in with that smooth, dangerous calm, saying, "Mr. President, while we're all sitting here waiting for the final results, there have been some even more serious accusations circulating out there. You know the ones I'm talking about, the really ugly ones. Would you like to address those directly, or should we just let the science speak for itself?" And the question landed like a slow knife, as Jimmy didn't spell it out because he didn't need to, as everyone in the room understood exactly what he was pointing toward: the ugly rumor, the one that went beyond parentage into something darker, and the one that had been whispered in comment sections and passed around in screenshots and hinted at by public figures who always maintained just enough plausible deniability. And the pressure in the air became almost unbearable as Trump's breathing grew heavier, with his hands clenching into fists on his knees. And the waiting the accidental microphone leaked the quiet surgical pressure from Jimmy all became too much as Trump finally exploded by shooting forward in his chair, pointing his finger straight at Jimmy with face bright red with rage, saying, "You're trying to humiliate me on your little show. This whole thing is a setup, a witch hunt. You planned this to make me and my family look bad on live television." And his voice doing that all by itself. And the line hit hard as the audience erupted, cheering and laughing in shock, with many pulling out their phones to capture the moment that would be screenshotted and shared and discussed for months. And Trump sat back heavily, with chest rising and falling fast, as Barron remained silent but turned his head slightly to look at his father with those same steady, determined eyes. And then the big screen flickered as the lead lab technician appeared live from the independent facility, with the entire studio holding its breath. And she looked directly into the camera with the calm authority of someone who has spent a career delivering results that change people's lives and has learned to deliver them without drama, because the results are Trump and Melania Trump. And for a split second, the studio was completely silent. Then it detonated with cheers, gasps, and thunderous applause, filling the room simultaneously as Trump jumped out of his chair, pumping his fist in the air, shouting, "I told you, I told everybody. Total vindication, 99.999%. My son, my beautiful son with Melania. The fake news is destroyed tonight." And he was celebrating hard, waving at the audience, pointing at the screen, soaking in the moment like he had just won the biggest election of his life all over again. And the crowd clapped along, caught up in the energy, and Trump turned and pulled Barron into a big hug, slapping his back proudly, saying, "You did it, kid. You showed them all." But Jimmy Kimmel raised his hand calmly, waiting for zero indicators of any incestuous parentage. The science is crystal clear on that, too. And the words landed like a bomb as the cheering stopped dead, with the audience gasping loudly and many covering their mouths simultaneously. And the ugliest version of the rumor, the darkest implication, the one nobody had wanted to say directly on live television, had just been addressed, name tested, and destroyed all in one sentence. And Trump's celebration froze mid-motion, with his face going from victory to shock and a heartbeat, with the expression of a man who just won and then realized winning meant something he hadn't fully processed. And then Barron's shoulders started shaking slowly at first, then harder, with tears welling up in his carrying. And he cried quietly at first, then harder, covering his face with one hand, as the audience went completely silent, watching the emotional release. From the young boy who had walked onto the stage as a quiet presence beside his famous father and had somehow become the most compelling person in the room. And Trump quickly wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tight, but his own face looked stunned, shaken, with his eyes keeping moving to Jimmy, clearly processing even now how perfectly the host had navigated every single moment of the night. And the proud father was holding his crying son, but the control he had been so certain of was entirely gone. And Trump suddenly exploded, pointing aggressively at Jimmy, saying, "You rigged this. This whole test was a setup from the beginning. You planned every second to humiliate me and my family on live television." And his voice cracked with rage as Jimmy stayed seated completely calm and nodded to the side of the stage where the second lab technician stepped forward. And Jimmy said, "Actually, Mr. President, here's the second independent witness from the lab. Everything was done under strict chain of custody rules with multiple cameras and notarized documentation. Would you like to explain the process, doctor?" And the technician confirmed clearly, professionally. All procedures were transparent, witnessed, and fully documented. No interference. The results are 100% reliable. And the audience burst into loud applause and cheers as Trump stood there, arms still around his emotional son, breathing heavily, looking at the technician, then at Jimmy, then at the audience, and then Barron stepped forward, wiping the last tears from his cheeks with the back of his hand, and looked straight at Jimmy Kimmel and spoke clearly into the microphone, saying, "Thank you, Mr. Kimmel, you gave me the chance to end all these lies tonight. I appreciate it more than you know." And Trump immediately tried to jump in, reaching for the mic with a forced smile, saying, "Well, Jimmy, I think what my son means is..." But Barron cut him off for the first time all night, calm, firm, absolute, saying, "Dad, enough." And the words silenced the entire stage as Trump froze eyes wide with genuine surprise, his mouth open, for a response that didn't come as Barron continued looking directly at his father, then back at the camera, saying they heard the truth. Now we let the country decide who was lying. And the audience gasped, then exploded into the loudest applause of the night as the moment hit differently than everything that had come before. This was his son quietly but powerfully standing his ground against his own father on live national television with all the cameras rolling and all the country watching. And Trump stood there, mouth slightly open, eyes blinking rapidly. For the first time, he had nothing to say. And Jimmy Kimmel stood up slowly from behind his desk, wearing that signature calm smile, and waited for the noise to settle just slightly before delivering the final line of the night, saying, "Well, folks, tonight we didn't just get comedy, we got closure. Science doesn't lie." And the crowd cheered wildly as the band started playing the outro music. As Jimmy shook hands with Barron, first warmly with genuine respect, then offered one to Trump, who took it stiff awkward, a smile that didn't rot. Victorious, but the strain showed as the lights began to dim. And Trump and Barron walked off the stage side by side, with Trump keeping the forced grin plastered on, nodding at people as he went with his shoulders tight and his steps a little heavier than when he'd walked in. And Barron walked taller than ever, with posture straight, chin up, composed in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with something much harder to define. And the morning after, the entire country was still buzzing with the storm, officially, over the truth having won and America talking about it for a very long time to come.